Sitting southwest of the Colorado Front Range, Crested Butte may come across as somewhat of an underdog compared to other destination resorts in the state. Misleadingly located in the town of Mount Crested Butte, the real town of Crested Butte is a few miles south of the resort. The mountain isn't as large or snowy as its Colorado competitors, but its isolation and prominent peak make for a unique atmosphere. Crested Butte is much more isolated than its Front Range competitors. The resort is more than 4 hours from Denver, and there are no direct flights from most major U.S. cities. So is it worth the trek? In this video, we'll take a look at Crested Butte's overall mountain experience, and then we'll go through how the resort stacks up in our mountain score and overall rankings. Before we jump in, be sure to check out our website, peakrankings.com. Additionally, be sure to like and subscribe to help us grow, and be sure to hit the bell so you don't miss any of our video content. Crested Butte's footprint boasts perhaps the most striking peak of any Colorado resort. The top of the mountain stands out with its unique shape and is truly a sight to behold, and its surrounding land is much less developed than many competitors. However, the resort feels shorter than it really is due to its modest base-to-summit vertical. At just 2,300 feet from the main base to the top of the high lift T-bar, and 2,600 to the very top of Crested Butte Peak, the resort just doesn't enjoy the eminence one might expect from a destination Rockies mountain. Crested Butte is not the place for those prone to elevation sickness. Despite its lower base-to-summit vertical rise, Crested Butte tops out at a similar elevation to Front Range mountains. This means that the resort sits at a very high base elevation, so even those in lower mountain areas may find the altitude overwhelming. Crested Butte receives the same high-quality snow as other Colorado mountains, but it doesn't see quite the same quantity of it. This means the resort's terrain takes longer to fill in than that of a typical Rocky ski area. Add in the gnarly footprint, and you have a recipe for rock skiing conditions every day. Measuring in at 1,547 acres, Crested Butte is smaller than most other Colorado destinations. But within that footprint is a decent variety of skiable terrain, including tree-defined trails, glades, and a few bowls. Perhaps more so than any other Colorado resort, Crested Butte is an expert's paradise. More than half the resort comprises double black terrain. Some expert areas are much more remote than the rest of the resort, giving them a distinct character. Reaching nearly all of these lines requires a ride up one of two T-bars. If you've only skied at other Colorado resorts, heed serious caution when exploring Crested Butte's double blacks. These runs vary substantially in difficulty. Some maintain expert pitches typical to other resorts, while others involve extremely high consequence terrain with no room for error. Resort staff often post signs at the entry gates with personal warnings of the danger. In some areas, the only way down may involve mandatory air or straight lining.
Woo! Oh, oh, oh.
While many of Crested Butte's double blacks can be directly accessed by lift, much of the resort's outermost footprint requires some hiking to reach. It takes a short hike to get to both the peak and the Spellbound Bowl, while it takes hiking, albeit up a groomed path, to exit the Teocalli Bowls. The third bowl warrants hiking to get both in and out. None of these hikes take more than 20 or so minutes, but they really start to wear down on your stamina after repeat treks, especially given the extremely high altitude environment in which Crested Butte is located. That being said, the snow in some of these difficult to reach expert zones stays fresh much longer than in most other resort areas. A few areas require hiking or catwalking even when it might not be expected. Getting out of the expert banana area warrants some catwalking at the bottom and a ride up the short but slow west wall chair to get back to the normal lifts. For less experienced skiers and riders, Crested Butte may seem a bit also-ran compared to other Colorado destinations. The resort's footprint is already about half the size of a typical high-end Front Range resort, and with so much of the acreage comprising expert terrain, there isn't a considerable amount left over for lower abilities. That being said, various mountain pods for all difficulties do exist. Runs of similar challenge tend to be congregated in the same area, leading to natural insulation for skiers of different ability levels. Beginners will probably most enjoy the Red Lady and Painter Boy pods, both of which offer trails that are chiefly beginner in nature. grooming on these trails is very consistent. Intermediates will be attracted to the Paradise and East River lifts, which both offer an array of groomed cruisers. Both areas are isolated from the main base and offer stunning views of the surrounding wilderness. Most of these runs are regularly groomed throughout the season, but some remain ungroomed. Some runs have groomed sections next to an ungroomed one. Additionally, the Prospect and Goldling chairs offer access to severely underrated intermediate groomer terrain. These lifts mainly function as avenues for real estate access, but the terrain they serve is incredibly isolated and beautiful, and surprisingly so for such a low elevation area. These places are out of the way, but they're worth visiting at least once on a Crested Butte trip. The Silver Queen and East River chairs service the only two pods that really contain advanced but not quite expert terrain. Silver Queen hosts steep groomers and some long demanding mogul runs, while East River specializes in black diamond glade terrain. Many of these runs are harder than average for a single black. A few single black runs are also accessible from both T-bars, including Crested Butte's only advanced level bowl terrain off North Face. Crested Butte is not known for its freestyle experience, but the resort offers two modestly sized terrain parks. One of these is a beginner-centric setup found off the Painter Boy lift, while the other, Lower Twister, is a park with features that are chiefly medium in nature. Unlike most other Colorado resorts, some key mountain areas see quite variable openings at Crested Butte. The iconic Crested Butte Peak and extremely isolated Third Bowl really only open a few weeks each winter, usually around late February or March. On the other hand, terrain for non-experts tends to stay reliably open throughout the season, and early season snowmaking allows for a consistent opening date. Crested Butte's lift network is generally modern, with high-speed lifts in key areas. While some zones maintain slow, fixed-grip lift service, the rides in these pods aren't overly long. However, Crested Butte's lift infrastructure does not lend itself well to repeat laps across expert lines. Direct access to the majority of double black terrain comes from one of two T-bars, and nearly every run ends far beneath the T-bar's bottom terminus. Often, it takes 1 to 2 lifts plus another T-bar ride to end up back where you started. Getting back to the North Face T-bar isn't the worst thing in the world, with a few different lift options available to get there. But getting back to the high lift can be a bit of an ordeal. The only way to access this upper mountain T-bar is by first taking the Silver Queen lift, which is already one of the most popular chairs at the resort due to its location at the main base of the mountain. Frustratingly, this can often mean waiting in long lines at Silver Queen just to get back up to the T-bar, which typically sees few crowds. A helper double lift called Twister provided an uphill alternative until a couple years ago, but unfortunately, it's been removed. Crested Butte also suffers from a few other lift network issues. The Goldlink area and lodge offer one of the few beginner-centric environments at the resort, but the only way to access them from other mountain areas is by taking the Painter Boy triple chair. During peak times, this lift does not offer sufficient capacity to handle demand. Lines can get especially bad as groups try to reach the Umbrella Bar Lodge during lunch hours. That being said, it's rare to wait in lines in most other situations at Crested Butte. The mountain attracts fewer crowds than the more convenient Front Range resorts, making for less demand on the uphill infrastructure. Crested Butte's on-mountain facilities aren't overly special, but they get the job done. In addition to the aforementioned Umbrella Bar Lodge, food options as well as both indoor and outdoor seating can be found at the main base and the Key Paradise junction point. On-mountain food is pricey, but not atrociously so. Vibes here are considerably more local than at most competing Front Range resorts. For experts, it's truly hard to beat Crested Butte thanks to its vast array of extreme terrain. But for less experienced skiers, the mountain just doesn't offer enough to match its Colorado competitors. That being said, Crested Butte does offer one significant advantage: a reasonable asking price. Tickets cost about 20 to 25% less than at many Front Range mountains, meaning that while the resort isn't perfect, guests of all abilities may find Crested Butte a compelling economical choice. Now let's go through how Crested Butte stacks up in our resort rankings, which are determined by the following 10-category mountain score. Crested Butte doesn't see the same quantity of snow as some of the Front Range mountains, but it sees very light, dry accumulation, and it gets an 8 in this category. Crested Butte's beginner through advanced terrain is pretty consistent, but its expert lines are subject to variable conditions or regular closures, and the resort gets a 6 for resiliency. The resort is decently sized at just over 1,500 acres, but smaller than most other Colorado destinations and gets a 6 for size. Crested Butte kills it on the expert terrain, but options for other abilities are a bit lacking, and the resort gets a 7 for terrain diversity. Crested Butte is about as demanding as it gets in Colorado, with extremely high consequence terrain across the whole footprint. The resort is truly extreme and gets our highest rating of 10 for challenge. Crested Butte sees high-speed lift service across most of its footprint, but some areas are served by slow chairs or T-bars or require hiking to reach. The resort earns a 6 in this category. Crested Butte isn't the busiest resort in the world, but a few popular lift routes are either indirect or lack redundancies, and the resort gets a 7 for crowd flow. Facilities get the job done but aren't anything special, and the resort gets a 5 in this category. Crested Butte's modest size makes it relatively easy to get around, and the resort gets a 7 for navigation. And finally, mountain aesthetic. Despite the modest vertical and footprint compared to competitors, Crested Butte's peak and surrounding wilderness are truly breathtaking, and the resort gets an 8 in this category. These categories add up to an overall mountain score of 70, placing Crested Butte 10th in Colorado and tying it for 23rd overall. You might want to check out Crested Butte if you're attracted by its extremely demanding expert terrain, isolated feel, and reasonable ticket prices, but you might want to skip it if you're looking for bigger and better beginner to advanced terrain, more consistent snow totals, or less of an altitude. For more information on Crested Butte and more than 50 other North American ski resort destinations, check out peakrankings.com.